Good afternoon. I'm Barbara Lemmen. I'm Senior Photographic Conservator at the Conservation Center for Historic Art and Artifacts. Oh, wrong. Art and Historic Artifacts in CCAHA in Philadelphia. And today I'm really looking forward to working with DHPSNY and speaking with you about one of my favorite topics. I feel like we all intuitively understand cold and frozen storage from our experience with food. Its power to halt deterioration, how it causes condensation on cans of soda we take out of the refrigerator. Here is a recent and dramatic example. That's what the pictures you see on my first slide. It's a fruitcake from British biscuit maker Huntley & Palmer's that was recently uncovered in the Antarctic. Still smelling edible and perfectly preserved, according to the news. It is believed to have been left behind by the survivors of Captain Scott's Terra Nova party in 1911. Film and glass from other ill-fated expeditions have also been discovered. So it's pretty neat. I want to say that let's get back to the topic at hand, away from fruitcake, but I'm going to cover the theory and practical steps today that you need to get cold storage up and running in your institution. This includes acquainting you with the research and resources that are available. Two of the main sources of information are the National Park Service, which has a website we'll talk about later, and the Image Permanence Institute in Rochester, New York, which does a lot of the research on preservation of photographic materials. So you'll see there's a photographic bent to my talk because that's my specialty, but I am going to cover all the materials that we encounter usually in library and archives and museums that need this kind of care. Just a minute for an adjustment. Okay. So all organic materials decay, especially in the standard environmental conditions that we have for our mixed collections in our institutions, which is around 50% relative humidity and 72 degrees Fahrenheit. Reducing either of these, the humidity or the temperature, will slow down the chemical reactions that run the deterioration. In fact, a 10% drop in temperature will basically double the lifetime of an object. And you can see in this little graphic right here from filmcare.org, which is a website run by the Image Permanence Institute. So they're talking about, based on data for color film, so we have 70 degrees Fahrenheit and 50% relative humidity on the left, which gives us 33 years for this film. And on the right, just by going down to 62 degrees, we get 68 years for the film. So our research has shown that there are measurable benefits to reducing the temperature and using cold and frozen storage for your collection. Here's kind of a summary list of those. You gain useful life for your original objects, and that's the key, is you're trying to preserve original objects in this way. You get low humidity and temperature. By putting them into cold storage, it gives you time to plan and maybe raise money for other aspects of their preservation. Often this storage method costs less than digitization or reformatting, and to the advantage of some collections, it decreases their use. And it is the best and only preservation method for certain unstable materials. Some materials will deteriorate in normal room conditions without intervention, and there's nothing, only a low temperature will stop that. And we're going to talk specifically about what those materials would be. Okay. So I want to talk a bit about the temperature ranges. What do we call cold versus frozen storage? And sometimes you'll hear people talking in general about cold storage when they mean anything with a cold temperature. So it's good to be specific about those because some materials require one and say can't be frozen. So these are kind of guidelines, and clearly anything that's frozen has to be at 32 degrees or below in Fahrenheit. Cold is around 40 degrees, and there are a few institutions like NASA that have sub-zero storage. And generally, we're counting on between 30 and 40% relative humidity, almost always 40% with those temperatures. So one of the things that can stand in the way between you and implementing cold and frozen storage are concerns about the safety of the collection and how it could impact your staff. So here's a list of possible concerns people have had over time. Fortunately, research shows that these are really not an issue, or they can be addressed with the proper procedures. And one of those things is the sealed vapor-proof packaging, which we're going to be talking about. Unfortunately, a much more realistic concern, I would say, is the cost of this method. There's cost at many stages, your initial purchase and installation of the equipment. We'll talk about the types of equipment that you might want to look at. The packaging, storage furniture, energy, security, maintenance, and often I've been told that the cost of environmental control in institutions is the highest single cost that they have. Okay, thanks for letting me know that you're having trouble hearing me. Jason's helping me adjust my mic. Oops, gone too far ahead. All right, so there are 5 basic stages to setting up cold storage. The first is to identify and prioritize those items that need to go into cold storage. And second would be to prepare the collection. Third, select equipment facilities, access the collection, monitor and maintain it. And we're going to be going through these stepwise. So prioritization, I mean, it's a rare institution that can put everything into cold storage that may require it. So it's good to go through these steps. A lot of these are the same factors that you might use to make other preservation decisions. Some of them can be made by curators, collection managers, conservators, often in consultation. We're going to concentrate on the material aspect of collections objects. So if you're familiar with the term inherent vice, and I mentioned that earlier, things that will deteriorate no matter what you would deteriorate at room conditions, and they need cold storage. And all of these materials are in that category. So early film-based photographic materials, that includes cellulose acetate and cellulose nitrate film-based. Anything that's color photographic material, inkjet prints, poor quality paper and books, and audiovisual material. I'll talk a little bit more about all of these categories. Here's some examples of black and white and color film on a plastic film base. We've got motion picture films, got color slides, microfiche, negatives. You can see some of the deterioration that will occur without cold storage in the fading of the slides to single colors. That slide in the center, the cellulose acetate base, is deteriorating and distorting. Some of those negatives at the upper right are starting to turn yellow. In addition to the National Park Service, we have the Image Permits Institute, which provides a lot of the research and creates these tables of kind of a summary of environmental conditions needed by various photographic materials. So you can see the chart that shows the different types of film bases: nitrate, cellulose nitrate, cellulose acetate, and polyester across the top. And on the left-hand side, the various temperatures. And they also have, you can quickly see the best conditions for each type of material. So cellulose nitrate, only frozen conditions are acceptable and considered best practice. For acetate, again, whether it's black and white or color, it must be frozen. Polyester, the polyester plastic itself is very stable. So when it's black and white silver gelatin, even room conditions are acceptable, but when it's color, it needs to be frozen because the color dyes will break down. And these various categories of various unacceptable, acceptable, and best practices correspond to ISO standards. ISO is the International Standards Organization. Their conditions for medium and extended term storage. So we're always looking to go for the blue best practices. And there are ISO standards for photographic glass plate negatives and film and photographic prints and digital prints. But there aren't any relating to books and paper and audiovisual media in terms of environment. I take that back. There is for AV material, and you'll see them later. So here's some examples of traditional photographic prints and digital prints. The bottom right is an inkjet print. The upper right corner is a photocopy or electrophotographic print. The other ones are color prints, and you can see at the upper left kind of the fading that occurs with a chromogenic print over time without frozen storage. And here is the IPI chart for photographic prints. Traditional black and white photographs do pretty well even in cool conditions and all right at room temperature conditions, but anything that's color needs to be frozen. And there's different stabilities for the three main categories of digitally printed photographs. The inkjet prints are less stable and really should have frozen conditions. Dye sublimation and EP, which is electrophotographic, are much more stable and do fine at higher temperatures, but often these are mixed collections and it's hard to ID the individual processes and separate them. So then it's good and safe to freeze everything. So I'm going to talk a little bit about AV materials. We've got magnetic tape and optical disc media, and there is the ISO standard for audiovisual for magnetic tape and the Image Permanence Institute chart. So the problems with magnetic tape is the base can be, it's a base with a binder that holds the magnetic particles. And there's different formats. There's there's video, there's data tapes, and there's audio recordings. They all have similar structure. They have a plastic support with a binder with the particles inside of it, and you can get the plastic support can decay, especially if it's acetate. So it's cellulose acetate, similar to film base. The binder often also decays, and we get what's called sticky shed syndrome. So ideally, to preserve these, you want to put them in cold or frozen storage, temperature-wise. The interesting thing about audiovisual media is that sometimes reformatting is a much better preservation method than cold storage because of the discontinuation of the playback equipment. So sometimes in order to preserve it, you need to reformat it now and not freeze it, because if you freeze it, you may never be able to play it. So that's something different about this material, digital material, than analog material like photographs. Optical disc media, DVDs, CDs, all of these are layered structures, like a hard plastic support with different layers and the image material on them, which are usually a dye. So there can be instability in the different components, but more common problems are delamination. So these are generally more stable at cold storage and should not be frozen. The idea is that if they're frozen, there could be an increase in the delamination. So as I was saying that, so overall, when people store audiovisual collections, they tend to put them in either cool or cold storage rather than trying to separate out the different formats and put some in frozen conditions and others like CDs in just cold conditions. So paper, I've just got one slide that kind of covers all paper materials, and we're talking about paper from the mid-1800s to now, which is lignin-containing paper, which will eventually become kind of very acidic and brittle, not high-quality papers like rag papers of earlier times. And so there's not an ISO standard, but there's an ISO standard for paper. So few collections have cold storage for these materials, although they would really benefit from it, and the standard shows 35 degrees as a good storage temperature. Partly because they're considered, they're more stable than things like photographs and negatives, but also because a lot of the paper is contained within books. And it's really hard to put a book into freezing storage because you can't, it's much more difficult to provide a surrogate of it to your user because of that 3D quality and the incredible volume of information that it contains. So often they are just kept at conditions in which they can be readily accessed. This is a slide of exceptions to cold storage that I've compiled with some of my colleagues. I've got CDs and DVDs at the top, but also these photographic processes. They tend to be things that are a laminate structure that would probably have issues with any changes in temperature or humidity that might go along with cold storage, or that we just don't understand well enough what their behavior could potentially be. Polaroid materials, case photographs where you have glass and metal, and additive color process again, which has glass and many, many layers. Again, book conservators are unsure whether books should be frozen because of their large volume of literally volume of material. It's so slow to freeze it and thaw it, and all of the components of the covers, like leather, don't respond as well to these changes as a lot of the materials we've been talking about. So we're on to preparing the collection. There's a few key points here. The first thing is you want to establish control over your collection. And this means you should at a minimum have a created inventory and ideally processed all the materials. This is key because once they go into cold storage, you won't be able to retrieve them unless you have them extremely well organized. It's also part of, if you're going to be reformatting them, you would need all that information to be for that process. But it's important to know that if you've got material that is a high priority for cold storage, it's better to put it in right away than to wait until you can digitize it. Older films like cellulose nitrate can decay significantly, including a loss of information in only a couple of years, so it's better to freeze it, and then as you remove it, gradually and digitize it as you go or as people request it. Some good news for now is that for things that are going into cold and frozen storage, you don't necessarily have to rehouse them. This can be a great cost and time savings, letting you put things in cold storage quicker. So you only need to replace the housings if they're physically or chemically unsound. So there's an example on the right of extremely brittle envelopes that the object is in danger whenever you handle it. And on the bottom right are not very attractive, but perfectly safe and sound film cans that could go into cold storage as they are. So I'm going to talk a little bit about relative humidity, kind of have this little block discussing it in the middle of our presentation. It's such an important concept. So I'm just going to explain basically what it means. This is terrific Image Permanence Institute graphic here. So relative humidity means the percentage of water that's in the air compared to the percentage that the air could hold. So you can see the cylinders get smaller as the temperature goes down because the air could hold less water. But all of them have the same amount of water present. So what happens as the temperature goes down, which is what happens when you freeze something, the air becomes more and more and more moist. The relative humidity goes up. And actually at a point where you reach 100% humidity, you've crossed the dew point, and that's when you get condensation. So it's important to know this is why we package things when we put them in the freezer, and if you don't, you get freezer burn. Is because the humidity in like a standard freezer or refrigerator is 100%. We want our objects to experience a relative humidity of about 40% at all times to maximize their preservation. So you can see kind of here at 75 degrees and 50% is sort of room conditions. And I said you cross the dew point, you go down, and the humidity goes rapidly up as the temperature drops. So also, relative humidity in this diagram helps you to understand why condensation occurs. So if you bring something that's warm out into a that's into a warm room, like you bring a package out of a freezer, or you come into a warm room out of the cold, you get condensation. You get condensation because at that surface you've crossed the dew point. So the next step is to talk about vapor-proof packaging. And what that does is to create a microclimate around your, and I say photographs because I'm photocentric, but around your objects to control that RH as things go in and out of the freezer. So there's a lot of benefits and also some problems with vapor-proof packaging, including the cost, as we talked about before. Once things are packaged, the packaging is opaque, so you can't see what's inside. We're going to cover a lot of the details of the packaging later. I want to say that you only have to do the vapor-proof packaging if there's uncontrolled relative humidity in your freezer. And some vaults can provide humidity control, so this would be unnecessary. I've got a quick series of diagrams to show you what's included in this vapor-proof packaging. So to start, you've got your objects, your files or whatever, photographs within a box, an archival box, or your non-archival box. You can see you've always got some space in there, and you need to fill that because that air contains moisture that will come out, will go into your objects and raise the humidity, their humidity, if we allow it to stay there. So we want to reduce the amount of air. And we do that with a moisture buffer, which can be anything from cotton to scrap pieces of mat board. It also you want to fill that space so that you can turn the box on its side if you need to when putting it into the freezer. You have a relative, an RH indicator card, and we'll show you some later with little blue squares on it, and that monitors the humidity that's actually at the objects. You put that within a vapor barrier bag and put another indicator card on the outside of that. Then you put a second bag on the outside of that, and there's various kinds of plastic bags that we use for this. Just a moment, I'm going to take a drink of my tea. I'm getting over a cold. The reason to have two bags is because one is very vulnerable mechanically, and so that by having two of them, you have double protection. You're less likely to have leaks or get the corners damaged, which would compromise your environment. The National Park Service created a system using a static shield bag and a giant Ziploc bag. So these are kind of the 4 steps in creating this. You can see the RH strip on it. And what we're going to do next is we're going to show you a video from the Park Service site showing you exactly how to do this wrapping. So you can see that it's like wrapping a Christmas present. It's not difficult, but there's lots of little aspects to it that it's good to know ahead of time so you can plan well. So I'm going to send you to this, and then I'm going to have a cough
When your film-based photographic materials are ready to pack, you need to prepare 2 labels for each box. We want to place a label on the short side and the long side of the box, with as much information as possible to identify the contents. At a minimum, you should include the accession number, catalog number, and a subject or brief description of the materials. At this time, you need to apply a humidity indicator card to the box. Apply 2 pieces of double-sided tape to the back of the card. Be careful to not tape over any of the indicator spots. Place the card next to one of the labels. Select the side you will be able to view when the box is in cold storage. The next step is to place your box in the inner barrier bag. Make sure that the labeled end with the humidity card is facing into the back of the bag.
Push the box all the way back and center it in the bag. At this point, you can add weights to the top of the box to help hold the bag in place as you wrap.
It helps at this point because you'll be taping down all these seams to create a bunch of little taped tabs that we like to put along the edge of our table, maybe around this size, so you have them ready. You'll need a bunch of these.
It is usually easier to start wrapping the sides of the box. Fold the side seam and any excess bag material in the direction that will not obscure a label or a humidity card, and place a piece of tape over it. Press out air as the bag is tightened against the sides of the box. To get a good seal, use a bone folder or any other type of tool that will help smooth and secure the seam. Next, you need to use tape to secure the flaps hanging out on the end of the box. Fold these flaps back. Be sure to secure both sides of the box. Next, secure the end of the bag.
The first stage of this method is to seal the end. So you'll want to gather the 2 end pieces. Once again, your weights can help push some of that air out, or just using your hands along the side of the bag to push as much air as you can out of there. Grab the 2 end pieces together, and depending on the length of the bag, folding this in 1 or 2 times, creating a nice end to your bag.
You should place a short piece of tape on each side flap of the folded end. These will keep air out and hold the folded end in place, assisting you in the next step by using a long piece of tape to properly seal the bag. We use this long piece of tape to cover the entire fold from end to end. Before you secure the long piece of tape against the box, we recommend making a little tab on one end of the tape to help the next person who needs to open the bag. After you've finished wrapping the barrier film bag around the box, you need to apply a second humidity indicator card to the outside of the static shielding bag. Use the same method of application as you did for the first card. If possible, keep it on the same side of the box, but be careful not to obscure the label. After the second card is in place, you can insert the box in a Ziploc polyethylene bag or poly bag. Again, be sure to avoid obscuring the label and cards with seams or the Ziploc end. The bottom end of the bag is usually the best place to view your label and cards. As with the first bag, you will need to fold and secure all the sides of the poly bag to create a tight fit. Secure the sides of the poly bag with pieces of tape. Keep in mind you may need longer pieces of tape to hold the side seams, because the folds on the poly bag tend to pop if not fastened securely. As with the barrier film bag, you need to avoid trapping air inside. Make sure you push as much air as possible out of the bag as you seal the Ziploc end. Use the weights to help with this task. When you have the Ziploc end sealed, You need to fold it so it can be secured against the box. Use small pieces of tape to secure the sides of the folded end against the box. Then use a longer piece to wrap around the entire fold from end to end. Be sure to place the tape over the fold so you cover it entirely. If not properly sealed, the ziplock can pop and air can leak into the bag. Different sized and shaped boxes require various wrapping techniques, but the goal stays the same: to create an airtight package with a stable microclimate.
Welcome back. Hi, so I think the video is important because you can see what's available as a resource, but also all the little things that you have to plan for. You want to clearly have standard size boxes. The bags tend to come in packages of 50 or 100, so again, you want to know what size boxes you're going to be packaging to start. The static shield bags are special, like polyester. The polyethylene zipper bags are 6 mil, so you can only get them from a few sources. You can't buy them off the shelf. And the handout, Cold Storage Supply Resources, gives you sites to get everything they showed, including the tape. And also my cold storage reference list includes a lot of the resources that are on the site. The site also has a sheet on measuring boxes to know exactly what size bags to order. It's really comprehensive. I want to give credit to Teresa Bollinger, Conservator of Paper and Photographs, who was the taller woman with the dark curly hair. She's the one who really brought cold storage into the mainstream as far as anything in heritage preservation's in the mainstream. I owe her a lot. So you can also make your own, clearly, and this is the critical moisture design, was an earlier design for this box, which uses 2 of the heavy Ziploc bags. And rather than filling the empty space with cotton or some other material, uses desiccated mapboards to absorb the extra humidity. You can buy a kit with all of these components that you just have to put your objects into, called the Image Freezer Kit, Image Archive Freezer Kit. The price is reasonable if you only need a couple of them, because, like I said, you have to buy these materials, like the polyethylene bags, in large lots. And it also allows you to do odd size materials if you make your own rather than buy the kits. So there's a lot of flexibility there. So the next stage, we're going to be talking about equipment and facilities that you might use. There's really 3 options: lease commercial storage space, some kind of freestanding freezer or refrigerator, or having a walk-in vault or storage room constructed with or without humidity control. Lease commercial space can be really easy, but it tends to be expensive. I mean, the Conservation Center has clients who use Iron Mountain for their cellulose acetate film. Fortunately, there is no climate-controlled storage available in the US for cellulose nitrate film, so you have to create your own system for that. It could be a permanent or temporary solution, but generally they're not centrally located, so it's you have to wait to have access to your materials and have them brought back to you. So a freestanding refrigerator or frost-free freezer is a really easy solution. Typically they run at 35 or 0, depending on what you're looking for. You can often buy them off the showroom floor, or you can get a scientific or research level one, which tends to cost more and be better made. But the Conservation Center, we recently purchased one, and fortunately there's no brand or exact type that I can recommend for you. It's like shopping for mattresses. Everyone is different. You can't really comparison shop. So we finally, after ordering one that turned out to be poor quality, that had been recommended, we went to the showroom and just kicked the tires. I found one I really liked, reasonable price, easy readout, easy to operate, and it should last us a good long time. Fortunately, like any piece of equipment, they tend to have a 10-year lifespan, and you have to factor in the fact that you're going to have to replace it in about a decade. So you can usually fit only about 20 to 72 cubic feet in a refrigerator or freezer like this, because that's the size that they run. And you will need to do the sealed packages. Shelf space can be limited and less flexible than creating a vault. Oops, like that. So things to look for, as I mentioned, whether you get a commercial or scientific one, you want really sturdy shelves because you could be putting a lot of weight onto them. You want one with low heat generation, quiet operation, because you can have this in your collection storage space, which is a real advantage. And of course, what's it called? When you get the low energy use. I forget what that term is. It's been around for a while. Energy Star, and we looked for one that matched that category. Here's an example. A colleague of mine, Gary Soretsky at the Monmouth County Archives, he's got 2 little refrigerators under the counter in his workspace, actually 3. You can see he's got double-bagged boxes of slides stored in them. He's taken out the shelves to give himself a more flexible workspace. He's got some turned on the side and some are vertical. He's a really practical guy, and this is a great solution that he's come up with. So when you want to load the refrigerator or freezer, you've got to measure ahead of time and figure out the tightest pack configuration you can come up with so you don't waste space or energy. You can see that sometimes you've got to make sure that all of the labels are facing out so you can read them easily. You can't block the cold air vent inside the freezer. That's about it, but it's pretty straightforward. So you can see this is Marble Seal packaging. So this is another variation on the National Park Service packaging that the National Gallery of Art uses. Here again, a little bit of note about the difference for cellulose nitrate film, and I want to say a disclaimer, I'm not a specialist on this, in that you can't, you should always contact someone and talk to a conservator whenever you have cellulose nitrate film in your collection. I mean, just don't go by this slide. It's a problem, it's a hazardous material that's flammable. You have to follow the National Fire Protection Association 40 guidelines for it regarding everything doing to storage and handling. It doesn't specifically talk about cold or frozen storage, but it is possible to use what's termed preservation best practices if you get permission from the right authorities. So I can talk to you more about this if you'd like. But anyway, you can store it in a freezer, a maximum of 50 pounds, but the freezer has to be this type. It has to be one for flammable material storage, and it can't be in your same space as your collections. So if you've got more material than will fit in one freezer, when do you get a vault versus just use multiple freezers called a freezer bank? And usually about 150 cubic feet of material is the tipping point. And these are freezers at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. that are holding the X-rays that they've taken of their paintings in their collection. So conservation documentation often ends up in freezers. When you get multiple freezers, you're obviously dealing with more noise and heat and weight, and you should start considering a vault if you're going to go above 10 units. So walk-in vault, and I'll show you some examples, typically run at these temperatures. Pros, having a vault lets you can have humidity control or not. It's certainly much cheaper if you don't have humidity control, but there's some other pros and cons that we'll talk about. And I intended my talk to serve as a reference material in addition to a presentation, so I'm not going to hit all of the points in all of these slides, but they're there for you to go back and read. One important thing to know about vaults is they're very expensive, complicated to build and to run. So you've all been told that you should make the HVAC person your best friend, and that is definitely double if you get a vault installed. You can see in this diagram, though, that having one large open space gives you more flexibility in terms of shelving. You can even have compact shelving. You can have really large objects, like if you had enormous framed photographs, which I've had to deal with, you can put them in a vault, and you clearly can't address those in a freezer. So here's a vault at one of the National Park Service sites with humidity control, which means they don't have to have the packaging. So you can go into this vault and you can just pull something off the shelf and look at it rather than having to remove it from the packaging and then putting the packaging back on. That's the key advantage to this. Here's a real life example, me in the red shirt visiting the Museum of Modern Art, where they have a freezer on the right, an S.B.N. Daphner, a photographed conservator at MoMA, showing me the freezer unit that's within the refrigerator unit. I'm sorry, I have to digress for a moment and take a sip. Thanks for your patience. So what's wonderful about this is that they have all of their color photographs in cold or frozen storage. They're very lucky. You can see on the lower left, they have large framed objects. And they've, in terms of crossing the dew point, they have the temperatures and relative humidity set so that objects don't have to cross the dew point. They can take them from the freezer into the refrigerator, let them sit overnight, and they can take them anything from the refrigerator to the outside conditions and let them warm up, and they won't get any condensation. So that clearly takes careful planning. So this is another version of standard system called the Simple Freezer Vault. And this is kind of a cross between the two types of vaults, in that you have local humidity control within the gasketed cabinets. So each one's a microclimate, so you can put the boxes of material directly in the cabinets. You don't need the packaging unless you're going to take them out of this environment. So this is much less expensive, and it is in use in some major archives, but it is more uncommon, and you do need to maintain the cabinets. They have large sheets of desiccated matboard in them that absorb the extra moisture. So this is a picture of Henry Wilhelm and Mark McCormick Goodhart, who are two of the other researchers kind of at the forefront of cold storage in our field. So the next step is accessing the collection. And there's three key issues regarding this. One is retrieving the material. Another one is and time out of storage, how it relates to that. There's staging, that's bringing the material in and out. And then there's reconditioning and repackaging the material, which is necessary before you put it back in. So here's a quiz. Does this cold storage space have humidity control or not? See, they're doing a little browsing right there in that cave, because the humidity is controlled. Some research was done by the Image Permanence Institute about the importance of not taking your materials out of cold storage for long periods of time, because that can decrease or negate the value of the cold storage. So you can see if you have something out for 0 days at 40 degrees and 40% RH, you get time and years to reach 0.5 acidity, which is a level of deterioration in cellulose acetate film. It takes 450 years, where if you have it out for 1 month, the value of the cold storage is decreased by 2/3. And if it's out for, say, half a year for some reason, you can lose all the value of the cold storage. So that shows you that if you take something out for a researcher to use, maybe you have a finite time period on that, or if you're taking it out to reformat, you want to be ready to do the reformatting and get it back in the freezer. I'm sorry about my cold, it's hard to shake. So staging or acclimatization, so that's just bringing something out to room to reach room temperature and relative humidity or thermal equilibrium. So your goal is to prevent condensation and uneven drying that would occur if you just brought something out without protection. And usually takes just a few hours for the average documents box of material to reach room temperature, but we usually say to make it 24-hour period. That just kind of standardizes it, because sometimes you have multiple reels of film will take a bit longer, or if you have just a little document box, it might take an hour. But that way kind of have a procedure where a researcher requests something. You take it out and you let it sit overnight, and then it's available the next day. And this can be accomplished in several ways. We talked about having something packaged, or you can have an antechamber that prevents, so your goal is to prevent it crossing the dew point. So if you have a vault, you can have an antechamber that's at a temperature and relative humidity between the vault and the room conditions, and bring it in there for a while and then bring it into the room. Or you can have the sealed packaging. So if you've got an object coming out of a freezer or refrigerator, vault, or freestanding, if it's already packaged, you usually just bring it out into room conditions. Don't open the packaging, let it sit overnight until it's warm, wipe off any condensation that occurs, and open the package. If it's coming out of a vault with humidity control, you need to put it in some kind of sealed packaging, get out the excess air, and then do the same procedure. If you're going to be bringing things between buildings while they're warming up, then it's good to put them in a cooler, kind of to slow down this whole process and protect them from much higher conditions that could be outside. So we've reached the last stage, monitoring and maintaining the system. So I'm going to start this section with a little cautionary tale. So this is Martin Sharp, director of the Canadian Ice Core Archives, on a good day with one of his ice cores. A freezer malfunctioned at the University of Alberta recently, and the temperature reached 100 degrees, which melted 180 of his ice cores. These were collected in the Canadian Arctic since the 1970s and are irreplaceable. And the news article describes them as becoming little puddles of ancient water. So they did not have a system in place to monitor what was going on with their equipment and contact people when it malfunctioned, which will inevitably occur with equipment. Sometimes it happens because of outside, the equipment just wears out. Sometimes there's outside conditions. You could have a disaster so that water got into your vault, and then you might not recognize it if you don't go in very often. So malfunctions, excuse me. So malfunctions wouldn't be bad if the equipment stopped working, because then things would gradually heat up and you could turn it on again or buy a new freezer. What happens is they tend to overheat, which can be extremely dangerous if you have flammable materials like nitrate inside. You can combat this problem by having redundant systems, and often vaults will have, say, 2 cooling systems or some kind of alarm. And also you want to periodically inspect the equipment. So fortunately this is a vault with quite an elaborate monitoring and alarm system on it, but you can just buy inexpensive wireless alarms that you can program to call or text if the conditions go out of a specified range. And when we have our freezer on, we just put our data logger inside it, which also has the same kind of feature. So periodic inspections mean actually going into the unit, your freezer or vault, and looking at the humidity cards if you have packaging. Check them every 3 months, and then we'll tell you if you possibly have a leak in your bag that you need to correct. Check your other monitoring devices. Check your freezers for frost buildup, which is the problem we had with this freezer, poor quality freezer that we returned because the gaskets were in very bad condition. That means you have leaks. You want to check that the air vents are not blocked inside or outside, and also you need to do maintenance, including the classic vacuuming of the coils. And it's always a good idea to keep all of the important paperwork related to the equipment and your procedures handy, just for ease of access every day and in case there's emergency. So a map of the interior, with the location of every different box, any inspections, all the procedures, that would be for warming and acclimatizing things, and then reconditioning and putting them back in. I should say about reconditioning, if you have a good environment, good relative humidity in your space, then you can just package things up in those conditions, put them in the sealed package and put them in the freezer. If you do have a high humidity, you're going to need to condition and recondition things, say a room with a dehumidifier in it, so that they will go in at the humidity that you want them to be maintained at. Any equipment manuals and of course emergency numbers should go on the equipment, just in a little folder. And a little visual drama to end our program. So again, just a reminder of those materials that are the highest priority for cold and freezing storage. And I want to thank you very much for your attention. So on to questions, Jason. Oh, okay. Okay, let's see. Christine, is 0 degrees too cold for acetate color film? Absolutely not. You can go below 0. I don't think that there is a temperature that is too cold for this film. It doesn't have any, if it's just straight film, color film on a cellulose acetate support, there's no vulnerabilities that would cause problems in those conditions. Oh, Christina's. Okay, you're welcome. Let's see, I'm looking back up to see if I missed any questions. No? Okay. Like I said, there's so much material available on the Park Service site and in all of their reference material. And in my reference list, it gives you specific links to get the Park Service documents and a lot of more detailed literature if you're going to be building a vault or you have a really complicated collection to address. Okay. Oh. I have to say that I'll just talk a little bit about cold storage for collections versus disaster recovery. The Conservation Center actually purchased a freezer because we freeze materials that come to us wet, damp or wet, as part of disaster recovery efforts. But we have very similar requirements for the equipment. And we're also able to use our freezer for pest eradication. You can't do that if you have your collection stored in it, but I just want to let you know that a good quality freezer is kind of a universal material. Okay, Julie May. Okay, we've got a couple more questions coming in. And thank you again for your patience with my cold. I was hoping that I was fully recovered. Fortunately, we had I guess it was good that we had that video kind of right in the middle. That really saved us. Okay, a question from Julie. For refrigerators or freezers that do not have an external temperature gauge, is it appropriate to put a monitor inside the unit for monitoring, or does that compromise the internal temperature too much? How frequently should that be checked? Now, that's absolutely what you'd want to do. And I was saying we have a data logger from Testo Severus that actually is wireless, and so does the temperature readings, logs the data wirelessly so we can look at it, and can text us when there is a problem. Of course, it's great to have external and external so that you can just walk quickly by it and see what the temperature is, but you definitely want to monitor it in some way. Is that model on your supply list? No, the supply list is only the packaging materials. Let's see, ours requires us to. Yes, ours also requires us to download the data if we want to keep it, but we can look at it at any time. Can you repeat the name of the data logger? The brand is, it's Testo Severance, I believe. You'd be welcome to contact me after this, and I can give you some references specifically about selecting data loggers, and even put you in touch with the person on our staff who's in charge of our data loggers. I think that might be the most helpful, because I don't know more than the one that I'm currently involved in using. Okay, thank you, Julie. And Claire, if you had acetate film with vinegar syndrome, would you store it with other film collections, or do you have to separate it? So ideally you do separate it, even if it's in cold storage, but in cold and frozen storage, you've slowed down the deterioration so much that it's much reduced, the off-gassing is much reduced, but also you've got it in sealed packages, you've got it in the vapor-proof packages so that it won't affect material in other containers. But you're right, it's a really good idea to put that into cold frozen storage as soon as possible, ideally frozen storage, so you stop the vinegar syndrome so that it doesn't get worse. Because at the early stages, you can still scan the film, whereas when it gets extremely distorted, the only way to scan it is to strip off the emulsion layer. I hope that answers your question, Claire. Let's see, Christy, can I also confirm that VHS tapes should be in cold storage? I believe I've seen conflicting information. How about audio tapes? To say, the information I gave you is what I've learned about audiovisual material. What I can do is give you some more resources. Look at the cold storage references that I've sent you. There are some related to audiovisual material on there. And if you don't get your questions answered, you can be in touch with me about it. And you do see that some people say you shouldn't freeze magnetic media. Image Permanence Institute says that in guidelines that it is safe, but that it could potentially be a problem with the lubricating material on some tapes. It's not my specialty, but I'd be very willing to help you get the information that you need. Okay, thanks, Christine. And I realized that I did not talk about defrost cycles in freezers, but I've seen that question on the internet. And these are frost-free. You want a frost-free freezer. It's possible to purchase one that doesn't have a defrost. And I've seen those used for pest eradication in some institutions. If you had cold frozen storage that was dead storage where you never went in, you could have a freezer without defrost cycle because the frost wouldn't build up on the coils. Otherwise, you need to have one that defrosts. Ours you can set to a minimum of 2 defrost cycles a day, and I actually put the data logger in to see what temperature change there was. It's very small, and it does not occur throughout the unit, only at the coils. And so the packaging that your materials would have within the freezer would mean that they would probably not feel that temperature change from the defrost cycle. So it's not a concern. So, okay, another question from Claire. Should glass never be frozen? Glass plate negatives that are gelatin glass plate negatives can be frozen. We do prefer not to freeze collodion wet plate negatives. I think that they were listed, collodion wet plate negatives were listed on my slide about to never freeze objects because they're a collodion layer on glass, and they also have a varnish, and they have been known to delaminate. Of course, silver gelatin glass plate negatives are generally a very stable material and don't require freezing or even cold storage for their preservation. They are really they're more mid or lower priority material. I believe that in the quick guide where my tables came from the Image Permanence Institute, they do have glass plate negatives included with the best practices, all of those different categories for the different temperatures that I was showing you. If you can't locate that chart on that reference on their website, let me know and I'll help you find it. It's free for everybody, and maybe we could even provide a link to people, Jason, as a follow-up. That's one of their to their website in general, and maybe to a couple of the best sources for related environmental information for this topic. Other questions? And as I said, we're waiting. Currently, the cold storage website for the Park Service seems to have a glitch where you can't view the videos. So as soon as we get an answer about that, we will let everyone know, because very, very concerned about that. If that be corrected, so that everyone has access to this vital resource. There is no equivalent, unfortunately. There's no other videos. There's a lot of, all that information is contained in literature, but it's, as you can see, it's really good to see someone doing the process, especially when it gets more complicated, like wrapping cans of film, which can be kind of a Laurel and Hardy-like experience. Okay. One last call for questions. Okay, well, thank you, and I encourage you to follow up with me. Oh, one more question's coming in. And follow up with me with additional questions that you have or requests for information. Oh, and that's very kind of you, Becky. Thank you too. Bye-bye.